Hello and welcome to Chapter 5. In this chapter, we start talking about stress. Specifically, we go into defining it, measuring it, and managing stress. When we talk about stress and health, one of the key things people bring up is how stress can make us sick. Stress can cause negative health outcomes. But how specifically does stress do this? There are going to be two key specific systems in our body that can be impacted by stress, that are going to be these key systems where stress actually takes a toll from a biological standpoint on our system. The first is going to happen in our nervous system. The nervous system is a system through which billions of individual cells, called neurons, function electrochemically. In other words, there's an electrical charge that these neurons use, and they send chemicals to communicate to each other. These chemicals are going to be called neurotransmitters. So when these neurons send neurotransmitters to each other, they talk to each other, and they send messages throughout our body to communicate important things. The two major parts of the nervous system are going to be the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system consists of the brain and the spinal cord. So you can think of that as running central down your body through the spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system is going to be the part of your nervous system extending out through the rest of your body, through your limbs and all your other tissues. Our peripheral nervous system can be broken down into two parts: the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. The somatic nervous system is going to primarily communicate with our skin and our voluntary muscles. The autonomic nervous system is going to communicate to our internal organs and can be broken down into two divisions: the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. Our parasympathetic nervous system is what's going to promote our nervous activity of our organs during time of rest or when we're not stressed. So this is going to help us promote digestion, relaxation, or normal growth processes. The sympathetic nervous system is what's going to be activated when we're stressed. So this is when our body slows down digestion, bumps up our heart rate, gets us alert. Our body's preparing to deal with stresses. So this is the process that's going to be really key when we talk about the physiological impacts of stress. The other system that's going to come into play when we talk about the impact of stress on our physiology is the neuroendocrine system. Our endocrine system consists of ductless glands that are distributed throughout our body. The neuroendocrine system is the specific part of this system that interacts with our nervous system. The chemical that our neuroendocrine system uses to communicate are hormones, which move through the bloodstream to different parts of the body. Specialized receptors in our internal organs allow these hormones to have specific effects on them. So when our neuroendocrine system secretes hormones, these hormones are going to go through the body and send specific messages to our organs. A little bit like our nervous system that we just talked about, but one of the big differences between these two is that the nervous system is going to be more of a quick effect, while our hormones are more of a long-lasting, slower, persistent impact. So, how are these processes impacting our physiology? Right? What's really happening? The idea is that when we're stressed and these processes react to stress, our body enters this fight or flight response, where our body recognizes that there's a stressor, there's something potentially problematic that it has to deal with, and it prepares itself to deal with this problem. It's either going to fight it, which would be dealing with it head on, solving the problem, interacting with it, or flight. It's going to run away from this problem. This idea of flight or fight comes from the evolutionary idea that when we encountered something, such as a predator, we would either fight it or run away. So our body is evolved to deal with predators, so it's going to respond the same way to our current stressors. While our historical stressors might have been something like a bear or a snake, our physiology, these processes, our nervous system, our neuroendocrine system, aren't going to react differently to something like a test, right? Our stressor or our stimulus is very different, but our physiology is the same. Now, what happens is that prolonged sympathetic activation, right, where we're in this fight or flight mode for an extended period of time, creates allostatic load, which can overcome the body's ability to adapt. The allostatic load can be thought of as the wear and tear that our body experiences for prolonged activation. So, going back to the idea of evolution, when I encountered a predator and I enter my fight or flight mode, right, my body's going to stop digesting, it's going to stop all the growth processes that it does on a regular basis, and instead switch itself to get ready to combat this predator. Since our stressors are different now, the stressor might not go away, right? So I'm going to fight or flight that predator. I run away or I combat, fight it, and then it's done. If my stressor is my job or school, this is going to look different, right? It's not something that I come across, I deal with, and then it's done. We're dealing with these stressors every single day. So our body is in this mode, it's diverting its energy to fight mode regularly, which creates this wear and tear on our system, which is going to be the mechanism through which our health problems can develop. Next, we're going to talk about different theories of stress. So these are going to be researchers who have looked at stress and its impact on the body and the mind and came up with theories of how this stress affects us. So first we're going to talk about Selye's view, which is called the General Adaptation Syndrome. Selye did his research looking at animals and their response to a number of physiological stressors. So this is things like extreme heat, extreme cold, loud noise, pain, electric shocks, right? Whatever the physical stimulus is that's going to stress our animal. So before our animal is exposed to these stressors, he's got this homeostasis, right? This line in the center, his normal, general, where his body is. So he's just walking around, going through life, no stressor. This is where his immune response exists. This theory comes into play when the animal is exposed to a stressor. So in this example, it'd be the extreme heat or the pain, right? Whatever stressor stresses this animal out. Something happens and causes him to go into this response to stress. So when he responds to stress, it's going to be in 3 different phases: alarm, resistance, and exhaustion. Alarm is going to be where the body initially responds, right? It's surprised, it just came across this stressor, and it's going to dip in its resistance, right? Or our immunity, our body's ability to fight off stress, we're going to have a really brief dip when we first encounter this stressor, that whoa response. Our next stage is going to be resistance. When the body's exposed to a stressor for a period of time, it's going to elevate its ability to fight this stressor, right? It's going to kick up. It's going to go into fight mode. All right, let's deal with the stressor. Let's elevate our resistance. And this will go on for a period of time depending the situation. So this is, say, our example of extreme temperature. It just got cold. I'm really shocked. I'm in alarm. And as it continues, that continued exposure to the cold, we're in our resistance. We kick up our ability to fight this stressor. After a while, however, the creature's body is no longer going to be able to fight this stressor. It's going to get to exhaustion because we've elevated our resistance, our fighting, for so long that we're just going to rebound and go back down. So we see this dip, this third stage where we're going below our homeostasis. Now, hopefully, this stressor is temporary and we get exhaustion, but eventually, hopefully around this time, that stressor is going to go away, so we return to homeostasis, right? We go back to our normal functioning. However, if that stressor doesn't go away, it might not rebound to homeostasis, right? Or if I exhausted myself fighting too much and my resistance was too high, we're eventually going to get down into this exhaustion where instead of just rebounding and going back to homeostasis, our body's going to dip below homeostasis. And that's where we become vulnerable to things like illness and death. Cellular's view has been criticized mainly because it is kind of missing that psychological component about humans, right? We talked about how he did most of his research on animals, so this model might fit pretty well for animals, but when it comes to humans and their stress, there's going to be a psychological component, right, that we're not really recognizing in this model. Another theorist, Lazarus, proposed a different way to categorize how stress happens to humans and the process that we go through. Lazarus did most of his research with people, so he's really going to take in that psychological part, which we know different things are stressful for different people, right? Someone who has 4 kids to feed and no other family members to support, losing their job might be really, really stressful, a huge stressor for this person. Whereas someone who has a spouse with a great job and a lot of family support and just mainly works for fun might not have nearly the same psychological stress response. Right? So how is Lazarus going to categorize one's response to stress? He's going to look at the appraisal that person has. So appraising is going to be one's judgment of the situation and how they think through and reason what the stressful situation means to them. So the primary appraisal is that first appraisal when someone first encounters a stressor. So when they first get laid off at their job or they first come across whatever stressor this is. At this time, the person's going to decide whether or not this stimulus is a stressor at all. So if that person gets laid off, they appraise, this is a bad thing, or I was going to quit my job anyway, I'm not in dire need for the money, we're fine. Say our example is a traffic jam. If you're driving down the street and you come across a huge traffic jam, your primary appraisal is going to be, is this a problem? If I'm trying to get to work for a big meeting, that primary appraisal is going to be, wow, this is really stressful. If I'm trying to go grocery shopping on a Sunday morning and I have no other commitments all day, no big deal, then my primary appraisal might be, this is not a problem. The secondary appraisal is going to be the appraisal where one asks, what are my options, right? This is going to be an appraisal of coping. So once I've appraised that this situation is stressful in my primary scenario, then I say, okay, how can I deal with it? So if I come across a traffic jam and this is stressful, I have a big meeting, what are my resources, right? Do I have the ability to call my staff and push the meeting back? Is it the type of meeting that I can phone in, right? Do I have these options for coping with, or do I not have options? So these appraisals of whether this is stressful and whether or not we can cope with something are going to affect our stress level and how we manage this stress. The third type of appraisal is going to be reappraisal. So when we encounter a stressful situation, we're often going to be reappraising, or we'll encounter different situations where this is more or less stressful. So with our example, if someone loses their job, if they appraise it as not stressful, right, or not that big of a deal at first, maybe they reappraise if their partner loses their job or their child gets into a very expensive college, right, where as new situations are coming up, we're deciding continually whether or not this is a stressful situation when those external factors come in and change the situation. Two other really important components in Lazarus's theory are vulnerability and coping. Vulnerability is going to be the situation, the state of being vulnerable to a stressor, or you're at risk for that stressor impacting you. This is going to happen when someone lacks the resources necessary to deal with the situation. This could be the psychological resources, they're not mentally able to cope with it, or some of these more tangible resources, like the actual money or the social support or whatever they need. All right, so someone without these things that can help them, they're really vulnerable to this stressor coming in and having a big impact on them. The other important aspect is coping. Coping is going to be defined as the changing cognitive and behavioral efforts to manage specific external or internal demands that are appraised as taxing or exceeding the resources of a person. So when something has happened to me, say we talk about lost the job or in a traffic jam, whatever the stressor is, coping is all these things, these efforts that I reach out and grab hold of to fix the problem. So if I fill out new job applications and I start seeking alternate ways of supporting my family, these are going to be coping efforts when you lose a job. If we start making calls to try and push back the meeting when we're in a traffic jam, right, these are going to be coping efforts that someone engages in to manage the situation and keep that stressful situation under control.